Hello and welcome to another episode of Father and Joe. I'm Joe Rocky here with Father Boniface Hicks. And Father, one of the things that I wanted to talk about today is something that we've touched upon before. But what it is how do we actually trust in the faith, trust in Jesus, trust in the Eucharist, however that sentence should be said? Because when we look around, there's definitely a mentality of person out there that says, if I don't do this, it'll never get done. And there is, and some people see self-fulfilling evidence that shows that. If I'm not the one who does this, no one's ever going to do it, and the house will always be dirty, and we'll never have dinner. Like you can see those kinds of examples. And what I want to dive into is how do we, regardless of our personality type or where we're at in life, actually learn to trust in Jesus and trust in the faith?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, it's really foundational for everything else. Your example of if I don't do this, it won't get done, uh, made me want to counterpoint that with, it's like, oh, did you make the sunrise this morning? Um, and that's like, oh, well, physics did that. Oh, Mr. Physics or Mrs. Physics? Which physics was it that made the sunrise this morning? Oh, where did that come from? Where did those laws come from? Anyway, we can press into some of those kinds of examples, and of course, you can go pretty far down a whole line of discussion with that. Another one of those things that's like, well, where did that come from? Why did you have the idea that anything needs to get done? Like, where did that come from? Why do you have a sense that there's a right and a wrong? And that, like, if you do certain things, that's right, and if you do other things, that's wrong. And like, how did that end up in us from the earliest years of our life, really? And across every culture and throughout history. But it's like, and if you tried to force yourself to change that, if you tried to convince yourself that things you know are wrong are right, you feel the violence that it does to yourself, and you can't ever really convince yourself. It never really agrees with you. And how is it that we can have something in us at that level that, like, we can't make change? And where does that come from? So these are different kinds of arguments for the existence of God ultimately. And so
Mhm.
if we can if we can say, and again, in any of these things, there are books, and I mean, people can debate for long, long hours and can bring up all kinds of things, and there's a lot of stuff there. But um, the the thing that we can then do, if you can accept, so a person who says, okay, well, yeah, I'll give you that. I mean, I didn't create the laws of the universe, and like, there is quite a bit there, and we'd say that there's an intelligence behind that in some form. It's kind of hard to believe that it's all just random. I mean, even if you imagine a million billion trillion coin flips, like, how do you ever get the platypus or something? It's just like a little bit crazy. Actually, I was at a retreat last week, and I was in Minnesota, and there were woodpeckers. Woodpecker is like, the force at which it hurls its head at a tree, and then like the whole structure. Any other creature's face would be smashed into a million pieces by that. And it's like, there's not an evolutionary development that you get from like a normal bird to a woodpecker. There's no like in between steps. It's like anything in between, it would smash its face into a million pieces. There are evolutionary leaps. Now, anyway, again, not to go down too far down those paths, because then you have to start splitting all different kinds of hairs. But just to say, like, if we can step back and be in awe at what things are and like how everything is, and then we start to, and this inner voice, this sense of right and wrong, that there is a good and a bad, and that there could be a direction towards better. And if we can start to receive all of that, then we're starting to ask important and fundamental questions about, like, okay, well, I didn't create myself, and I didn't create all of this, and I didn't create that sense of right and wrong in me. That was all given, and it was given by someone, uh, uh, maybe something, but let's say someone. And then if it's something or someone, what's that like? And then can we come to know that? And if we were to come to know that something, that someone, what would that be like? How would it improve my life to come to know that? And so those are the kinds of steps that we take. And then it's like, okay, well, that's fundamentally, we've walked our way into religion. That how do I relate with this one who gives everything, who's over everything, whose very self, whose very law is being, and the way that the universe moves, and what are the principles there, and how does it move? And so, so anyway, this is really starting from kind of basic principle kinds of things that, if we start to ask these questions, we can start to wander in these directions, and then we can start to say, well, people have tried to respond to this in different ways, and then we could test that out in some way. Now, I think what we find in Christianity in a particularly significant way is that in Christ, God has revealed that he is love. And I think that's another one of those really basic things that if we said in our lives, what is the thing that has given the most value? Now, what we could also say, what is the thing that has caused the most pain? But that goes hand in hand with the value. And the fact that we go back to it a lot of times, even after it's caused so much pain, to be let down, rejected, betrayed, neglected, that we have a sense, we have a desire, we have a longing that there's something greater, something more beautiful, that there's a love that's worth giving everything for. And so that these are the things that we then find in Christianity above all, and that's where it resonates with also what is in us. And then so then what do we have to do? I mean, ultimately we have to start trying it. It's like, well, you can't really fully observe it from the outside. Now you can see like the lives of the saints. You can see that this creates good things. Now there are plenty of examples of bad things in Christianity as well. So
Mhm.
there must be a way of living it that matters. There's a way to fake it, and there's a way to actually make it. There's a way to live it fully. And so, we observe those kinds of things. Well, what's the best example? What's the best way to live it? And can I start doing that? And if you're already in it, maybe probably a lot of our listeners are not avowed atheists or merely agnostics on the sidelines, but probably people who are somewhat interested in Christianity, and probably a lot of people who are fairly invested in it to begin with. But then we
Mhm.
start to look at the fruits. Well, what does it do to me to live it? And what does it do to me to not live it? And what does it do to me to listen to that voice inside of me that tells me what's good? And what does it do to me to deny or ignore that voice inside of me that tells me what's good, or that to do it even though it tells me that it's bad? What does it look like to live according to my conscience, and and to let that conscience be informed by the law of Christ, by the teaching of Christ? And what sorts of fruits does that bring forth in my life? How does it change things to actually do that, to try it? So those are a few of the kinds of things, and then I just went on this retreat called Grief to Grace, which was remarkable. And one of the things, the people who have suffered a lot of pretty serious trauma, big T trauma, you might say,
Mhm.
go on this retreat, and we're on this particular retreat that I attended, and and there's something that's really destroyed in them because of that trauma. There's a little child who was damaged, silenced, blackened over, hidden away, exiled. It feels destroyed. And you see, as we make our way through the Paschal mystery, so we see that Christ has united himself to every child, and he has in himself preserved the image of every child. And he has suffered in himself the suffering of every child. And he has risen from the dead and preserved and is able to redeem and represent that child and bring that child back to life. That's the power that Christianity has. So that's the power that I've seen with my own eyes. And for anybody else who enters into this, and wants to see those things. You want to see the power of the gospel. There are living examples, a lot of them, that are out there. Talk to anybody who's been at Grief to Grace as a simple starting point. Grief to Grace is a kind of an expansion of another shorter retreat written by the same woman, Teresa Burke. She wrote a retreat called Rachel's Vineyard, which is specifically for post-abortive women whose lives have been destroyed when the baby in their womb was destroyed. And through the Rachel's Vineyard retreat, which is all going through the Paschal mystery, uniting it to Christ, dying with him, rising with him, they're able to come alive again when part of them was destroyed with that baby. And as much as we want to convince ourselves that that's not the case, or some people want to convince themselves that's not the case, the evidence is to the contrary. This is Teresa Burke actually developed Rachel's Vineyard after she was leading a group therapy session on eating disorders and discovered that 9 out of the 10 women in the group had had abortions. And she
Mm.
thought, huh, maybe this is coming out in other ways. Then that's when she started to focus more directly on the trauma of abortion and what that does. So all of that is to say, we can also see evidence for the power of the gospel to heal and redeem. And so, how do we know that it's true? How do we trust in it? Well, it does what it says it's going to do. So, Christ unites himself to all suffering and even death itself and brings back to life. He brings things to life even in this life. And then, of course, he brings us to life ultimately, even after the end of this mortal life. And so we don't see that evidence in quite the same way, although the apparitions of saints, there are glimpses and uh, images that we get of that. But we can really see the redeeming power of the gospel already in this life. So anyway, few things to pay attention to.
Yes, and I think that there's a lot of greatness in everything you said, particularly in the why to believe in God part, the starting point of why. And I think you did a very good job of answering the why should we trust Jesus. But I think that the harder part that a lot of people have struggled with, starting with the initial analogy of I think I have things to do and I need to do them, is how. We have figured out as a species, we put a plant in the ground, it grows, we can use the fruits of that for various things. We have figured out, basic labor markets. We have figured out we need to do things and results will happen. But we haven't really figured out the how to truly trust in Jesus, trust in the faith, even though we know that we can see examples of it, and that there can be people out there that this is the most frustrating thing. Like, I know this will work if I could just figure out how to do it. Like you might see someone who's trying to like fix a car or something that they just want to go, but they have no idea how to get it going. And to me, I think that that's a problem that really needs to be delved into, and that's what I'd like to do here for the second half of this episode, if we could.
Yeah, sure. No, that's great. I love the practical application. The So everything that I just said comes into it. The why question, or yeah, I mean, what's the evidence, I suppose, for belief, and
Mhm.
pressing into the dimension of love, meaning, and some aspect of experience. So there are a lot of things that are interior there. Oh, now, why do you want to put a plant in the ground and have it grow? Like, why do you even care? And why are you trying to run a labor market? And why are you trying to get a house built? All of
Mhm.
that has to do with relationships. So if we weren't doing it for someone, then I don't know, ultimately we wouldn't be doing it at all. Man, there's I could make some exceptions to that still would fit, but let me just run with that.
Fair
Uh,
enough.
so we're doing these things for relationships, and what do we want out of it at the end of the day? Do we really want a house out of it? No, we want a home that we can have a family in, or
Mhm.
or at least a shelter from which I can then do something, live my life, and make a gift of myself. Most fundamentally, what we're doing as human beings is making a gift of ourselves. Now, one of the ways we do that is building things and growing things, feeding people, and providing for people in different ways. So, uh, what does God help with? Well, He helps with all of that. Now, He doesn't do things He doesn't take away from us the joy of giving. He doesn't take away from us the joy of creating and the joy of building. In fact, it facilitates it. Like, where did we get these ideas from? And who created the seeds that we can put in the ground and then they actually grow? Like, who developed these things and who led us to them? So we can start to see with faith, we start to see that God is behind all of the things that matter for the sake of relationships, for the sake of love. And then we see God's provision sometimes in extraordinary ways, precisely in these kinds of cases where it's like, my family is going to die if there isn't rain on these crops. Now, when there are miracles, so we could get into a whole thing, why are there miracles sometimes and not other times? But anyway, let's speak in positive terms. When there are miracles, God is providing for the sake of love, for relationships, for deeper intimacy, for greater trust. So that dimension, that application of the relational communion that we're sharing as human beings, he's providing for that. And then in other times, well, let's take a negative example. I put a plant in the ground and it doesn't grow. And then I have anxiety because I can't provide for my wife and my children. And what am I going to do? And God has a way of breaking into that as well through understanding. I mean, there have been many stories. There are great stories of men who give everything they have and fail, and then it's being loved by the woman in the midst of that. This is a terrible application, but it just comes to mind. It's not terrible, but anyway,
Mhm.
not a, the Top Gun Maverick, right? Tom Cruise, whatever his character name is like broken after he's been exiled from this program. And the woman
Mhm.
who's there is able to receive him and believe in him. And then he finds what he needs in order to actually carry out the mission, right? So this is also the way that God provides, but he provides for the sake of relationships, love, communion. He's not just sort of like a better factory or a more efficient assembly line or a magic 8 ball, or he's not some magical provision machine. He is ultimately all oriented towards love because he is love. And so how does he bring us into communion with himself? By developing a communion of love between us. And then, ultimately that also is from him and to him. He's the source and summit. We're always bringing that into the Eucharist and receiving the strength from it. We're bringing it to the Lord and receiving the strength from him. So that's his, we have to think in terms of the ultimate destination. The destination is heaven. It's not a neighborhood with a bunch of houses. So he's moving us toward that ultimate destination with all of these other things. So I think I still haven't answered your question. Let me give it one more try.
All right.
So how do I do this? All of the stuff that I do with him. So we do that in a kind of nominal way by beginning and ending things with a prayer. So it's at least a reminder. Now, it's not just a matter of tacking a thing on to the end. Sometimes we can get into that mentality, like I got to do the prayer. Well, we should keep leaning into what the prayer means, which is that I'm involving God, I'm inviting him, I'm asking for his help, I'm doing it with him, that we are doing it, that everything that I do, we do. And that's how we allow God to be a part of everything in our lives. Because again, everything ultimately is meant to be about what he's about, which is communion, love that wells up to eternal life. And so now at different times, depending on the work, and that's what I was trying to demonstrate, sometimes it's a cry of desperation. Sometimes it's an expression of thanksgiving. Sometimes it's just the peaceful interior that I need to carry out my daily work, but I do it with a different sense of awareness that I'm not alone in this. Sometimes it's easing my anxiety. Sometimes it's inspiring creativity. So when I do it with him, he is present in lots of different ways to me, and he works in me in lots of different ways. And so that's how I invite him into everything. I relate everything to him.
And that makes a whole lot of sense. So I think that's something great that we can end upon with this episode here and take into the following weeks. That the point of prayer is to become closer to God and to keep God in our minds. That we're doing this with him and not necessarily for him. And I think that distinction is something that's really worth contemplating and thinking about. Father, a couple of weeks ago, you were talking about how you've been a presenter for a long time, and how sometimes just stopping and asking questions, even though as the presenter, so much information, but stopping and asking the question of what is the difference of when I do something with God rather than for God. I think that is a very big thought process there, and a potential mentality shift that could help a lot of people out. So I invite people to do that in this week in between today and our next episode, to consider that and to contemplate that.
And just to be clear, not that doing things for him is wrong or that there's anything wrong with that, but I like the distinction to think through that and ask that question. Uh, I sometimes do things for him, but also can we try to do things with him, bring it into relationship with him, not just do things. Definitely not just do things with him, for him, in him.
Mhm.
Anyway, that's the relationality.